Hey guys, today I will be talking about mixing templates. Do you need one? What should you have in it? This and more in today's video. Let's do it. Before we jump into Logic, a little bit of background about mixing templates. To me, mixing templates should be pre-made solutions to problems that come up frequently. So what I like to have is a bunch of effects and a bunch of reverbs, delays, parallel compression, etc. set up already that I use frequently. So when I mix, I can use these effects instantly and don't have to get out of the flow and find plugins and set up settings, etc. So let's jump into Logic and I'll show you exactly how my mixing template is set up, and hopefully this will inspire you to set up your own. So let's start with the master bus. On my master bus I have a few plugins set up which are meant to emulate kind of a studio signal flow where the signal leaves the console and then goes into a bunch of external processors to do the final shaping before being recorded to tape. In the first plugin, I have a virtual mix bus emulation to simulate kind of an analog working environment. I usually have this set up to the Neve or the SSL setting, and I use a trimmer to cut or boost the level of the whole mix as necessary if I'm hitting my master bus too hard. Because of course I don't want to go anywhere in the red on my master bus, so I use this plugin to attenuate the level as needed. My second plugin is a digital EQ that I'll use to cut the very lows behind 20 Hz, and sometimes I use a little bit of very narrow cuts if I hear some resonances that I cannot get rid of in the mix alone. But I try to avoid it, of course, always try to fix things in the mix or in the recording if possible, and don't rely on using processing later on in the signal chain. Then I have a second EQ which is a little bit more colorful and a bit more aggressive as well. This I'll use to manage my mid-range if needed. So I usually cut or boost a little bit in the 1 to 3K regions, and I'll also use this plugin to add a little bit more shine or a little bit more bass to my mix. Then I have this Pultec style EQ set up, which I'll usually use to boost the very top of the mix. The top on this EQ is very broad, so it makes the whole mix just sound bigger. Not necessarily brighter, but bigger. I really like it because no other plugin or no other processor can do this. I will also use this one to boost even more of the low end if needed. After this I have my Fresh Air, which is kind of an exciter plugin. I really like it to add just a little bit more open top end to the mix. You have to be really careful with this. I only use 3, 4, 5, maybe 6%. If I need more, I'd rather go back and EQ on the master bus, or I'd rather go back to the mix completely and fix things there. Then I have my bus compressor. Usually I use this Brainworks Townhouse bus compressor, which is an SSL bus compressor emulation. I usually have it set up to 100 millisecond release or auto release, depending on the song, 10 or 3 millisecond attack, usually 2:1 ratio, very rarely 4:1. And I set up the threshold so I get between 0 and 4 dB gain reduction maximum. I try to keep it below 2 dB, to be honest. I don't want this to change my sound too much. Just a little bit of glue, a little bit more consistency. And after my bus compressor, I have a tape emulation. I try to hit this one somewhere between -3 and 0, sometimes a bit less. I just want to have a little bit of color of it, but not too much of the compression that tape will provide. I don't want it to choke the transients at all. One thing you'll notice is that my mix bus emulation and my tape emulation are on by default. This is on purpose because these two add a bit more color. So I want them on from the very beginning of the mix so I don't end up having to compensate for the tonal changes later on. However, all the remaining plugins I'll turn on as I go. Last but not least, after my tape, I have this Slate digital mastering processor. To be honest, I don't use the compression of it. I also don't like to use the limiting of it. What I do like though is this dynamic perception knob, which just makes things a little bit bigger. I don't know what it does, but I love it. I have it set up at 5. This usually works with every mix. Finally, I have the Matrix AB set up. This is really cool because I can check the loudness, the dynamics, the stereo image, and the correlation of my mix, as well as the whole frequency spectrum. But my favorite feature in this is that I can have all of my references dumped into here and compare directly between my mix and the reference mix while I work. This is immensely helpful. I don't like to endorse plugins, but if there's one thing you should buy, it's this one. So now that you've seen my master bus, let's check out the auxiliaries that I have. As you can see, I have quite a few auxiliaries set up and they're organized in groups for different purposes or for different kind of instruments. In dark blue here, you'll see all of the things that I like to use on vocals. This includes my slap echo, a stereo echo, a reverb, and a parallel compression just for vocals. The slap echo is just a mono slap echo of a 16th note. My vocal stereo will change between a quarter or an eighth note depending on the song, or maybe even a dotted depending on what I need. And I like to use a separate delay only for vocals because of course here I might want a bit more or less feedback than on my instruments later on. And sometimes I'll change from this digital 42 setting to a tape delay or a radio, whatever the song demands really. Most interesting, however, is the reverb. I have the Verbsuit Classic set up. I really love this plugin because I can load multiple different reverbs in it as well. So here I have an A-B setting. With this method, I have 4 different flavors of reverb already set up because of course no reverb will work with every song. I also have an EQ just before the reverb in case I have to cut some highs or boost some lows or cut the lows or whatever else it is. Finally, I have a parallel compression just for vocals. I have a saturation in it if needed, an EQ if needed, and the distressor set up to really fast settings to completely flatten the vocals if I have to blend it in later in the mix. After my vocal section, I have my kind of generic reverb section. So this is 2 different rooms and a hall or a plate that is already set up and ready to go. The drum room is just a studio room that has a really nice tail and not too strong early reflections. It works really well on strung instruments, on violins, but also on percussion and on vocals if needed. I also have this CLA style reverb setup, which I've taken from one of his tutorials. I really like this one. It just works really well on percussive instruments. However, this is very strong on the early reflections, so it's a very noticeable sound. And finally, I have a hall or a plate set up. Again, this is an A-B setting. A is my hall, B is my plate, depending on what the song demands. However, my favorite trick is to then combine all of these on the instruments. So maybe I have a percussive conga or a bongo that asks for a bit more early reflections. So I'll send it to this CLA room. But maybe I want a bit more tail on it as well, so I'll also send it to my hall or my plate, depending on what the song demands. So with these 3 reverbs, I have infinite possibilities and a lot of different flavors that I can create. I do the same with my vocals, by the way. I'll use my slap, my stereo echo, and the reverb together to create one big deep vocal tone. I don't just rely on one effect to create a big sound. It has to be a blend of many different effects. After this, I have 2 different delays. This is quite easy. It's just an 8th note and a quarter note delay. Of course, these are all subject to change. Right now I have it set up to this digital 42, which is a lexicon emulation, but it can change to a tape or a radio or whatever else. Then I have the probably most interesting section of my mixing template, which is my widening. I used 3 different flavors, which is a microshift, a super tap, and an ADT. I really love this microshift plugin. It adds width to pads like nothing else. I really like to use it on pads and sustained instruments. And I really like to use it on guitar solos as well. You have to be really careful with it. It's really easy to overdo. You don't want your whole mix to sound like microshift. So I tend to use it only on background instruments. And as I said, on solo guitars, if I want this kind of effect. Then I have a super tap, which is also for widening, but it's a little bit of a different flavor. What this is, it's essentially a very, very short delay that is panned to the left and the right, so it creates a little bit more width. It's really cool on guitars, and it's also really cool on vocals, so sometimes I'll use a blend of this and some other processing. And finally, there's the ADT. I often will use this on vocals, but it works on everything else. It's just a different flavor, again, of widening. You can look these plugins up. I don't want to go too deep into detail with that. After the widening, I have 3 different flavors of parallel compression for my drums. This is quite interesting because what I like to do is I like to combine these different flavors together sometimes, or sometimes use the Brit in a verse and the crush in a chorus. Let me show you what these do. The Brit one consists of a bit of British type saturation, maybe an EQ if needed, followed by a Neve style compressor, set up to 6:1 ratio, usually fast attack, 100 millisecond recovery rate, And when I use this compressor, it gives amazing attack. It gives an amazing punch to the kick and the snare. So sometimes I use this only on kick, snare, and drums, for instance, just to get a bit more attack. Then I have the famous all-in setting. We all know this. It's the famous 1176 all-in setting. You can look it up. There's a million videos of it. I love it. It works really good in rock and metal and all of these heavier genres. And then I have a CLA Crush, which I again took from one of Chris Lord Alg's tutorials. This is a really cool setting that I really like to use a lot because it's not that crazy strong, but it makes your kit sound a lot bigger without making it sound too aggressive at the same time. So it's a very versatile parallel compression chain. It has a 4:1 ratio, kind of medium attack and release times, and I set it up so I have about 10 dB of gain reduction. It works really well, and as you can see, I also boost a little bit of the very highs and the very lows before going into this. And this is really cool because when I blend this in the chorus, for instance, the drum will also become a bit taller, so it will have more lows and more highs, which is really cool because it will make the chorus instantly seem bigger as well. As I said, I like to use a blend of these, so I might use the all-in in the chorus, the CLA Crush in the verse, and automate them in different ways so that the song flows really well in the end. After this, I have a parallel compression chain for my bass. This consists of a sublift just to add a bit more sub bass, followed by some heavy compression and a bit of saturation. Now, I don't use this that often anymore because I like to get the bass sound right from the very beginning. But if the bass recording is not very good or I need a really consistent, very powerful low end for a heavy rock or heavy metal song, then I will use this and blend it in to taste. After this, I have my drum bus where I send all of my drums after they are mixed. This consists yet again of a virtual mix bus emulation. Depending on the genre or the song, I'll use the Neve or the SSL, followed by an SSL compressor. Now, I don't like to choke my drums, so what I do is I set it up in a very subtle, very mellow way and only compress 1 or 2 dB just to control those peaks a little bit. If I want to have a very obvious compression effect, I'll use my parallel compression chain instead. I also have this Pultec style EQ again on the drums, and I usually end up boosting a little bit of the treble and a little bit of the bass to make the drums sound bigger. So as you can see with the drums, to create size, it has a lot of different ingredients. I have 3 different parallel compression chains, and I have a drum bus which does some things, and of course I do my mixing in a certain way as well. So it doesn't just take one simple step to get a big drum sound, it takes many little steps to get a really big drum sound. And last but not least, I have a drum distortion, which is a trick I picked up from a metal mixer. I really like this. It's some heavier compression this time, followed by a distortion unit. You can use any kind of distortion you like. I just happen to like this one, but I might change it in the next version. And I usually use this in heavier songs again when I need a bit more crack on the kick or the snare. So I won't send the whole kit to this. I will only send the shells, so the kick, snare, and the toms. Blend it in, it's amazing. It gives amazing size, amazing aggression, amazing tone to the drums. Really cool, highly recommend. So these were all my auxiliaries. As you can see, there's a lot going on, but I do this all so I don't get out of the flow when I mix, and I have all of these solutions readily set up and ready to go. Finally, let me show you some EQ and compression chains that I also have ready to go. One of the reasons why I really like this virtual mix rack is because I can save a lot of the presets right here on top. So as you can see, the default is only the virtual channel, and then I can pick whatever I like into it. But even just to save this little bit of effort of moving this there and to have to think about this, I have a lot of these flavors already set up on the top here. These are chains of plugins that I really like and that have proven to be very versatile, so I like to have them ready to go as well. So this is my mixing template. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope it will inspire you to set up your own. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Maybe share your own mixing template with me. I'll be very curious to see what you're using. Maybe you will inspire me to do some changes to my own. I will see you in the next video. Take it easy and happy mixing. Bye bye.